Well, it's a Wednesday morning. We're going to get back into our devotionals. I missed last week. Some things come up to take care of. But we're going to be looking at Paul's journey to Rome, where he will testify the gospel before Caesar's court. And he's been arrested in Jerusalem. That was according to prophecy. We saw Agabus, we covered that earlier in our studies, where he tied a belt around his hands and basically said the man who belongs to this is going to be arrested in Jerusalem. He's had the intervention of the Roman government as they saw a riot-type condition developing over Paul's being there, and now he is having to stand before a Roman court, and the Jewish high priest and leadership is accusing him, and so he is now in custody. And where we're going to take up is in chapter 23, verse 16. We'll start a little bit. We'll start up at verse 12. When it was the day, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. They went to the chief priest and the elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore, you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly, and we are ready to kill him before he comes near." Now the sons of Paul's sisters heard their ambush. So he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand, and going aside, asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him to tell no one that you have informed me of these things. Then he called the centurions and said, "Get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor." And he wrote a letter to this effect. So we'll take up with the letter next week. But what we want to look at this morning is the circumstances that is bringing Paul closer to Rome and closer to his appearance and his defense of the gospel before the Caesar's court. And one of the reasons that Paul was able to have his sister's son, his nephew, go in and talk to the centurion is because they had already established that Paul was a Roman citizen. Even and a Jew, but a Roman citizen. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago, about the significance of Paul using his citizenship as a Roman when he needed to, using his citizenship as a Jew and a Pharisee when that served his purposes, all for the sake of the gospel. He himself considered him a citizen of heaven, and the other things in his life were just means by which he was able to fulfill and obey his commission from Jesus Christ, talking about how we need to see ourselves that same ways, citizens of heaven primarily, and when necessary use the aspects of our life, the circumstances of our life, to the furtherance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So the Jews are committed to killing Paul. 40 men have committed themselves to be willing to starve to death, do not eat or drink until Paul is dead. And they're attacking and killing Paul under the Roman centurions would have, in all likelihood, ended up in their death anyhow. So these men have made a life and death commitment to carry out their acts against Paul. It's the religious zealousness these men have for their faith in the law of Moses, and they're recognizing Paul's preaching of Jesus as the Messiah and his death and resurrection from the dead as a threat to the law of Moses. So they have rejected Jesus Christ as the Messiah and see him as an imposter, and see Paul's preaching as a heresy and an attack against all that Israel stands for in its faith over Jesus, over the law of Moses. And that motivates their commitment to take this action. So it's not just hatred for Paul. Because they've rejected Jesus Christ, they are, in their religious zealousness, willing to give their very lives. But, as so often happens, the sovereignty of God is over all this. Now, if we look in one level of circumstances, this looks really dire. You have 40 men so committed in their religious zealousness that they are giving up their lives for the death of one person, for Paul. And the whole Jewish nation leadership is going to be in on this conspiracy to kill Paul. And if we look at that in light of our own life circumstances, sometimes things can seem very dark, no way out, no hope. But in all that's going on, a young man, a nephew of Paul's, overhears what's being said. So he must have been in the proximity of wherever this was going on. And that overhearing of it causes him to go to Paul and say, Paul, this is what's going on. These men are going to kill you. Paul says, go talk to the centurion. He talks to the centurion, tells him what's happening. And Paul is bundled up and spirited away in the dead of night under tremendous guard to protect his life because he's a Roman citizen. And he's taken down to Caesarea to stand before court. What I want to bring to us today in a word of encouragement is that we should never be in despair regardless of what's going on. First of all, if we look back into the Old Testament, there's a story of Mordecai in the courts of King Ahasuerus, and there's two servants of Ahasuerus that are plotting to kill him. Mordecai overhears this and warns the king of it. Now, Mordecai was essentially a slave within this country, and as a result, he has no real obligation as a Jew to intervene in this. And yet, as a person under the law of Moses, and being there because of the hand of God disciplining the people of Israel, Mordecai looks out for the authority that's there, and he warns the king, and the king is saved. But nothing's done for Mordecai at that time. It's kind of all is forgotten. Later on, when Mordecai's life is in danger, and the life of all the Jews are in danger, the king is up at night, can't sleep, so he's having somebody read kind of history, things that have happened in the past, near past and stuff. I guess that's a good way to go to sleep. Get yourself a boring book and start reading. Pretty soon you're off to sleep. But in it, he hears, they read about how this guy, this one servant, this Jewish guy, had warned the king and saved his life. And the king goes, well, what was done for this man? And it turns out nothing. It was forgotten at the time. He was an insignificant person. And so the king goes, well, we have to reward him. And the enemy of Mordecai, Haman, is asked by the king, who he's the second most powerful man in the kingdom right there, what should be done for somebody who the king wishes to honor. So Haman tells him, thinking it's him the king's talking about, he tells him all that he wants to do. And as soon as he's done, the king says, well, good, go do this for Mordecai the Jew, because he had saved his life. And this is more than Haman can handle. The bitterness and anger for Mordecai deepens in his heart. But the interesting thing is that I want us to see is that in all of the world circumstances that are going on, God in his sovereignty is moving through insignificant means. So you have Mordecai, who's an insignificant Jew, sitting on the steps of the king's castle and overhears a plot. You have Paul's nephew, young man, we don't know how old he was, he could have been a little boy. What he was doing there, we don't know how he happened. Apparently, he was young enough that I don't think anybody took notice of him. If you were going to plot to kill somebody, and you're talking about it with the leadership of the Jews, an insignificant little Jewish boy sitting there would not mean anything to you at all. So they just simply ignore him. But he listens, he goes and warns Paul, and Paul is delivered from death at that point in time. Now, Paul was willing to die at Jerusalem. He had said that to the people. Why, when they were saying, don't go, he said, why do you break my heart? I'm willing to die for the sake of the gospel. But there was more that God was going to use Paul for. And it wouldn't matter how many people had conspired to kill his life. Nothing's going to happen to him till he accomplishes the will of God. And within God's purposes and timing, he will eventually be executed by the Roman government, by Caesar. But you and I need to see that we do not need to walk in fear of what's going on around us in our life. Whether there's wars or rumors of wars, whether it's rumors of riots or disturbances or whatever is happening, God is our God, our Father. We are precious in his sight, and he will watch over us, and he will guide and lead us. It doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen. It doesn't mean that people don't get killed or imprisoned improperly or whatever else goes on. But in those cases, if you and I are servants of God, children of God, whatever does happen is under that mighty sovereign hand of God to fulfill the purposes of the kingdom. And God will be with us in it as we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So I hope that will be encouraging to you in all that goes on today. And I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as we continue through the book of Acts.